My name is Peter Aeschbacher. I'm an associate professor of landscape architecture and architecture, which means I hold a joint appointment and I teach and support graduate research in both departments. Much of my teaching currently is oriented to undergraduate teaching in both architecture and landscape architecture. So my primary involvement with graduate students is in master's capstone projects and in master's thesis research projects. I think the quality that is most important for a graduate student to be successful is doggedness. And I might have said confidence or persistence or curiosity, but I think doggedness is the key. And the reason for this is that because most research projects, especially in design, are unclear when you start out exactly where it is that they're going. They're like design projects. So we kind of fill them out and find new avenues as we go along. And to say that one is curious is not enough, because if you have curiosity and then you run into diversity or into roadblocks, then it can stem your energies or your curiosity levels. But to have persistence is also not enough, because it simply sometimes translates into keeping going in the direction that you thought you were going in the beginning, because it's risky to stray from that path. As we are working on a research project, we figure out new things, we come to dead ends, we come to roadblocks. A project may turn back on itself. You may do it once and then find out precisely what the project itself is, and then do that 3 times. And the only way to get through, not the successful parts, but the parts where you get stuck, is by being dogged. If one is optimistic, one says, well, my feet will always land solidly as I leap into the void. And that's great, but we're not always optimistic, especially in the dark nights of our soul. But if we are dogged, then we will jump into that void simply because it's what we do. And then when we land on both feet, as we most often do, then we realize that it was simply by the kind of dogged leap into the unknown and the ability to keep going rather than stopping or dawdling or changing paths or giving up. That leads us to the successes that come, and they're the successes that were entirely unanticipated when we set out on the path. So my view on practice is informed by a larger view of myself as a designer and a particular profession or discipline as a way of achieving some sort of positive change in the world. So throughout my career, I've been a graphic designer, an urban planner, an architect, an information visualization person. So these are all design realms that for me are simply ways of getting things done in the world at different scales and through different kinds of projects. So that the larger overarching theme has always been one of social and environmental justice and equity, and achieving a thoughtfulness and an effectiveness of design out in the world that we don't typically do through kind of conventional service-oriented practice. So what this means is that I have a view of both practice as a thing that we do and a practice as a kind of mission of things that we do that transcends scale, or at least attempts to, that says that any given project that we do should do something beyond itself. It should have an impact or an effect beyond the scale at which it is working. So whether it's a simple artifact or a complex artifact like a building or a landscape, it should be impacting people in the realm of their activities in terms of institutions, and hopefully nudging society in a kind of direction that we want it to go, so that exemplary projects may inspire or lay a path for a way forward that shifts the view of things. So if I think of an example of how we have thought about reframing stormwater to a view that stormwater is also rainwater and that might be done artfully, these are ways in which a particular set of projects can shift the practice orientation. So The other component to that is that practice is more deeply embedded at these scales. So a future direction of practice that I would certainly enjoy seeing is one in which the scalar aspects of practice become more a part of the way that practitioners work. That practitioners are doing projects, but they're also involved at the higher levels, be it policy or planning or institutional levels. So my current research focuses on a general tenet, which is that design is the action arm of social change. And within this, I follow three particular areas that intertwine for me. They are design history, design activism, and design studies. Design history is the question of how we got to now and how it affects the way that we do things in the world. Design activism is the question around how we are effective designers affecting change in the world. And design studies is a closer look at how the processes of design actually carry out. Now, each of these is a kind of higher order umbrella within which I have particular projects underway. In design history, I worked for quite a while and am not quite entirely done yet. First on a history of the community design movement in the United States, which are a set of nonprofits that started in the 1960s that provided planning and design services to underrepresented communities. That's the practice background from which I emerged. And my sense in practice was that people had their noses to the grindstone and had not much of a sense of the history or the larger trajectory of the work that they were doing. They were busy in practice, but didn't know the larger story, and that needed to be both recovered, valorized, and then told in a way that would be useful for practice, especially in a kind of changed political and financial situation. My work on that particular kind of design history has also led to a larger idea about how we tell the stories of history itself. I teach an architecture and urbanism history course called Ideas Across Time, which seeks to find commonalities and the kind of repeating cycle of ideas across the last 2,000 years of, particularly of Western architecture. And in order to connect those to the current day, we see which ideas are repeating, but we are also seeing all of the paths that weren't taken or that were cut short. So these are ways in which designers sought some sort of change. So now we see a kind of overlap between design history and design activism, the question of how we got to now, and the question of how designers can be effective, as a way of kind of looking back to what have we done, what did we miss, what opportunities could be grasped from things that weren't fully realized in the past, and how might that help us proceed forward. Then that third area about design studies is one which tries to overlap three groups of people, all of whom talk about design. One group are the scholars of design who study the processes. A second group are the champions of design who tell wonderful stories about why design matters. And then the third group are the practitioners who are effective designers, but may not exactly understand how and why that it works. So by combining the areas of design studies, how design works, with design activism, then we can become clearer in developing tools and methods for how design activists go about things. There are a couple of areas that I am definitely interested in pursuing. One of them is the overlap between design studies and histories in terms of the visualization of the landscape of history. This is an idea that we might make an analogy either between landscape or buildings and the way that we perceive and understand history, particularly as a navigation device. The ideas underlying it are ones which try to show the structural flows, the bigger cultural, social, and technological ideas that are in a way like the foundations of a building or its structural columns, or the way that landscapes are formed by larger geological movements and materials. Visualizing that and making sense of it is a project that is a really interesting one to undertake. A second project is really about tools and methods for activism, one that arises out of a better understanding of how design process works, but then using it to make effective means for designers to implement out in the world in a repeatable way. So rather than simply providing inspirational examples of projects that work, I've been working on making some tools and would really look forward to having someone help figure these sorts of things out, about making tools that designers in the field could use to help structure their approaches. So start broad, go deep into the things that you are really interested in. Even the ones that don't pan out have the reward of being good work and will form a basis that will emerge later.